March 23rd, 2001. Due to the overwhelming number of requests I have received to tell about my experiences and bizarre discoveries in a cave not far from my home, I have created this webpage. I will outline the events that happened to me during the past few months, beginning with my journey into a familiar cave in December 2000 and ending, well, it hasn't actually ended yet. I will use my caving journal as the text to tell about my recent experiences, and I will give them to you as I experienced them in chronological order. I have also included some photographs that were taken during my many trips into the cave. I have also created a few illustrations to help the reader get a better idea of what things looked like inside of the cave. All of the photos were taken by me or by one of the few people I took into the cave with me. I want to point out a few things before I get started. First, most of the pictures were taken with a Kodak disposable type camera. I took a better camera into the cave on one or two of the trips, and pictures on this site are all original photos that have not been messed with or enhanced other than where noted. As a rule, I get my pictures put onto disk at the time of developing, so I don't have to scan them later. This ensures the best digital quality. Second, I will not reveal the names of the other people involved in this experience. If you know me well enough, you probably know them already. Third, I will not reveal the location of the cave to anyone for any reason, so please do not ask. I refuse to be held accountable for anyone's life but my own. I will refer to the cave as Mystery Cave, and no, that is not its real name. If you think these events sound far-fetched, I agree. I would come to the same conclusion had I not experienced them. I will try to finish the site as soon as possible. Check the date on the main page to see when I've made progress. To protect myself from people who might want to copy this site, I include the following. All text on this and following pages are my own words and copyright 2001. Caving Journal, December 30th, 2000. B and I decided to get one more caving trip before the new year, so we set our sights on Mystery Cave. Not a spectacular cave, but since neither of us had been caving in a while, it would be nice to go to any cave at all. There was a bit of excitement to this trip, since there was a small passage in the lower portion of the cave that I wanted to check out to see if it was possible to get past. It had a small opening, but lots of air blowing in and out of it. Even though it was way too small to climb through, I had never even checked to see what was on the other side of the passage. We got our gear loaded up and hit the road by 3 p.m. We got to the cave in great time because B likes to drive like a maniac. We anchored from the usual tree and began to rappel into the cave. I went down first and got my gear together while B came down after me. I will be referring to B many times. We've been caving together for many months now. He was injured in a caving accident a few years ago and was told he would never walk again. Though through hard work and perseverance, he not only walks, but he can get around very well in the caves. The trickier parts of the cave might slow him down a bit, but he can make it. As for the reference to the small opening in the cave, there's a saying amongst cavers. If it blows, it goes. Meaning, if a passage has good airflow, it's probably worth investigating. After we explored all of the usual passages, we climbed down to check out the hole. The hole is located deep in the cave near the lowest part of it, and it's on the side of the cave wall about 3 feet from the floor. To look inside the hole, I had to kneel down and duck under an overhang of rock. This is an image of the original opening. I put my glove in the hole for a size reference. I used my backup mini-mag and held it inside of the hole to see what I could see, and I was excited by what I saw. The wall around the hole was about 3 to 5 inches thick, and it led into a tight passage, and the passage opened up just inside the hole and continued back about 10 to 12 feet into a small crawl space. After that, it seemed to really open up. Although how much we couldn't tell, this could be a virgin passage. Obviously, no one had passed through this route before, but there could be a way into the passage from the other side. To even get to the crawl space, we would have to enlarge the opening. Currently, it was about the size of my fist. Once we got past the opening, we would have a tight crawl back to where it opened up. It would take some work, but we thought we could do it, so we sat down for a few minutes to rest and contemplate our plan of attack. While we sat there in the darkness, we could hear the wind howling from the other side of the passage. It was a low, eerie noise. We could also hear low rumbling from time to time, but that was no big deal. The cave was in vicinity of a highway that had heavy trucks driving on it, so we figured the rumble was just the effect of the trucks resonating through the rocks. We determined that our best plan would be to haul a cordless drill into the cave to drill into the rock. Then we could take a ball peen and a small sledgehammer and break up the rock even further. It seemed pretty straightforward. We would widen up the hole big enough to squeeze through, and we would see what was on the other side. The efforts to haul all of the equipment down to the hole would be a pain, but we hoped it would be worth it. I named the passage Floyd's Tomb after Floyd Collins, since it seemed to look like the tight spot where Floyd spent his last miserable days on Earth. This is a rough drawing of how the passage originally looked. For a bit of context, Floyd Collins was a caver back in the early 1900s. He got stuck in a tight crawl space and was unable to free himself. It's an amazing story that's detailed in a book called Trapped, The Story of Floyd Collins. I think that was the title. I don't recall the author. Calling our passage Floyd's Tomb was not only a tribute to Floyd, but a commentary of the size of the passage. In retrospect, it's sort of funny how simple I thought it was going to be. I figured a few hours of work and we would be in. Had I known how long it was really going to take, I doubt I would have even begun the project. Had I known what I was going to experience in that cave, I never would have returned. We gathered up our gear and headed for the surface. Normally, I couldn't care less if I ever came back to this cave. There is nothing special about it. But now, I was psyched about getting back and getting through that hole. We hadn't even left the cave and we were planning our return trip. The rest of this journal entry talked about the climb out of the cave, our dinner, and our trip back home. Caving Journal, January 27, January 28, 2001. B and I were both excited to get back into the cave and get to work. I figured with about 4 hours work we could be in and see what was on the other side, no problem. We had arranged to borrow a DeWalt cordless drill to bring with us. We had masonry bits to drill with, sledgehammers to break up the rock, bullpens to insert into the drill holes, and a few other tools that we ended up not using. Getting the tools down to the worksite proved to be a challenge, though. One of us would climb down the rope and stop at a ledge or a good resting place, then the other person would lower the tools. We kept repeating this routine until we got to the bottom of the cave, then we had to drag the tools to the hole. It took about an hour to finally get to work. B took the first turn at the hole. After an hour of exhausting work, we could tell that we were not going to get through in one session. We kept trading off after we worked ourselves into a sweat. One would take a break and get some food and water, while the other one would go to work. The routine went like this. To begin work, we had to get down on our knees and do our best to avoid smacking our heads on the ceiling. Working in this awkward position, we would drill into the wall around the hole. This was incredibly difficult, and we really had to push on the drill, and still it was very slow progress. Then we inserted the bullpen into the hole and hammered on it until we broke the rock up. Then we would repeat the process. To give you an idea of how slow it went, the typical sized rock that would break off was about the size of your fingernail. If we broke off a large piece, about 1/3 the size of my palm, it was cause for celebration. From time to time, for variety, we would just wail on a cold chisel with a 5-pound sledge. It was slow progress, and the problem with the sledge was we couldn't take good swings because of the tight quarter spaces we were in. Even though we spent many hours and several trips working on the hole, we never did find a better technique for widening the hole up. The drill, bullpen, hammer got the best results for our efforts. We came up with a few crazy ideas for breaking up the rock, everything from TNT, never seriously considered, to hauling a generator to the mouth of the cave and running an extension cord down to a jackhammer. We even thought about using liquid nitrogen to freeze the rock to make it more brittle. After a couple hours of work, we realized what our limiting factor was going to be. It was about then that our first battery met its abrupt death. We had a second battery, so we swapped them out, and the second battery lasted a little bit longer because we hammered and chiseled a little more often and a little longer each time. Finally, after about 3 more hours of drudgery, the second battery died and we called it a night. We could tell that we had done some work in the cave, but it was not much. For the first time since we got in the cave, we sat back, both of us, and took a break. It was nice to check out the results of our hard work. But then we noticed the howling again. It seemed to be a little louder than the last time we were in there, which we just chalked up to being because of how much more progress we made on opening up the hole. What we could not figure out was the rumbling. It too seemed to be louder and more frequent, but this time we couldn't attribute the noise to the trucks. The road that the trucks drove on was not very busy to begin with, and at this time of night it should be dead. Yet the rumbling continued. It seemed to be coming from deep within the passage. B said he would ask some veteran cavers what could be causing the noise. We didn't spend long admiring our work, however. We still had to haul our gear up and out of the cave. Actually, we left some of it in the cave. It was still difficult work, however. What made it worse was we were both exhausted. Our original plan was to be done with the cave and hit a couple of other caves in the area the next day, but instead we decided to crash at a nearby motel, charge up the drill batteries, and go back to Mystery Cave. This is a photo of the opening after our first trip. Here, my journal goes on at length about the night after we left the cave. We got a room, dinner was excellent, I didn't sleep good despite the fact that I was exhausted, etc., etc. We both slept in, so we got a late start back into the cave on the next day. The second day working on the cave went about the same as the first. We both worked until the batteries were dead. We were still not even close to getting through, and we again worked ourselves until we were exhausted. The howling and the rumbling continued as it had the day before. On caving, before I continued with the next journal entry, I thought it might be helpful to the reader to explain a little bit about caving and about the atmosphere in the cave. As I reread and think about my description of the cave, I notice that a bunch of my language in my cave journal and the descriptions, or lack thereof, assume that the reader has a knowledge of caving and what it is like to be inside a cave. In other words, I write my journals for me. I will take this time to give a more detailed description of the cave. I will tell about what it's like while we worked on the cave, and I will summarize our feelings up to this point. The cave was discovered several decades ago when construction in the area unearthed its entrance. From that time to the present, it has been visited by mostly locals in the area and avid cavers in the region. Beer cans can be found intermittently in the cave, mostly in the upper half. When the cave was first entered, it was properly beautiful. Dust, graffiti, vandals, pigeons, and regular use have diminished its appeal. There are still places in the cave where small formations remain undisturbed, as a reminder of what the rest of the cave used to look like. To enter the cave, one must have a good length of rope in order to rappel down into the rock. A nearby tree serves as a good anchor point, and once the rope is tied to the tree about 20 feet away from the small cliff, it can be tossed over the edge of the cliff to a small ledge about 15 feet below. Cavers can then from there descend the short distance to the entrance. Once inside the cave, artificial light must be used. My light source of choice is a battery-operated, helmet-mounted light known as a TAG light, or TAG light. Safe caving calls for at least two sources of backup lighting, so for my backup lighting I have a mini-mag light mounted to my helmet and another helmet-mountable light in my pack, which I always carry with me. I do also carry glow sticks with me, but these are not considered good sources of backup light by some. I just think they're good for taking lunch breaks and conserving battery life. If all else fails, they are still a light source and could help you get out of a cave. After a short climb over some large rocks, the caver comes to a large pit. The same rope is used to reach the bottom of this pit. The drop here is only 50 feet or so, but it is not free hanging. In other words, you can't slide straight down the rope, which is preferable. You have to snake your way down and around sharp rocks as you descend. The ascent is made more difficult for the same reason. The pit varies in diameter from about 10 feet to 3 or 4 in a few places, and the walls are lined with a sharp white rock called popcorn. Let me correct that. It used to be white, but is now covered with dust and dirt that was kicked down from above by years of caving. The popcorn makes it painful to brush against the side of the pit. My choice of clothing is Levi's, t-shirt, gloves, and knee pads. I usually leave the cave with a few scrapes, but at least I'm comfortable while I climb around inside. The temperature is stable year-round. It feels cool in the summer and warm in the winter. We have gone in on freezing days, and 10 feet into the cave, it's warm enough that the coats aren't needed. It's a good temperature to work in, as we learned. For this size of a drop, I usually use a figure-8 descending device. For the climb back up, I attach myself to the rope using a Petzl ascender, but I climb up on my own without using the device. It's there merely as a safety attachment, in case I slip. Other cavers have their own methods of getting down and up. At the bottom of the drop, the caver gets down to some crawling for a while. There's a small room, about 6 by 6 feet, at the bottom that gives the caver a spot to leave his or her harness, descending and ascending gear. Since there is no more steep drops, the harness is not needed and will only get in the way. Once the caver gets down to the 6 by 6 room, he or she can take a break under a ledge while the rest of the party comes down. Then they must drop to their knees to negotiate a 10-foot long passage that is only a few feet high. This is where the knee pads come in handy. The floor is covered with soft dirt intermingled with bits of broken rock from above. The thin layer of dirt does nothing to soften the blow to the hands and knees as the caver works down to the crawl space. As a reward, at the end of the crawl, they get to drop to their belly and scoot under a tight squeeze. Not really tight, just something low enough to make the caver scoot along in the dirt. Once the caver gets to the other side of the squeeze, there are a few feet of crawl space, then the cave opens up enough to stand. For most of the rest of the caver can stand, or at least stoop. The cave splits off into several passages at this point. 2 routes round around rocks and crevices and come to abrupt dead ends. The other 2 lead to small pools of water. Each route is fun to explore. They all lead on for about 100 feet or so in a gradual downward slope. Most of the time the caver can walk upright in these passages, but other times they will have to climb over large boulders or occasionally crawl on their hands and knees. Water is a very common occurrence in caves. I have been told that one of the local residents was one of the first people in this cave and that his cousin dove into the pools using scuba gear. He said the cave continued down for a couple of 100 feet underwater. What they were hoping for, and what happens frequently, is that the passage comes up somewhere else, with virgin cave passages to explore. Unfortunately, I don't possess the knowledge to give more detail about the types of rocks in the cave. When we were drilling, we would have some parts that were easier to drill than others, and there were different colors in the rock, refer to the photos taken in the cave, but that is the best I can do to describe the makeup of the cave. At this point, the cave splits into 4 routes, and the 2 passages that dead end are to the immediate left of the caver. Straight ahead and to the right are the passages that lead to the pools of water. The entrance to the passage on the right is the largest of the 4. The arched opening rises nearly 10 feet into the air, ending a mere foot below the cave ceiling. As the caver enters the passage, the ceiling gradually lowers until it's about 6 feet high. It continues at this same height for the 40 feet that the passage travels in a continuous direction. This section of the cave resembles a hard rock mine. Its arch nearly perfect and the floor flat and easy to walk on. It's easy to picture rusty mine cars on rail lines, and dust-covered miners with blistered hands gripping dull picks. The pseudo-mine comes to an end, and the caver is once again forced to drop onto their hands and knees and get reacquainted with the floor of the cave. This time the crawl lasts for about 20 feet. The floor is sloping gently downward for the first half of the crawl, then it gets fairly steep and slippery. Able-bodied cavers can still climb carefully down the slippery slope. When I go with B, I carry the end of the rope that we use to get down to this point. I usually need to tie another short length of rope to the first rope to make sure he can use it to reach the bottom. The crawl lasts a few feet beyond to the bottom of the slide. Over the next 10 to 12 feet, the caver slowly begins to regain the standing position. After walking a few feet and climbing down a short drop-off, the caver arrives at a small level area which has a passage leading down immediately to the left. The passage ends 75 feet later at one of the small bodies of water. To the right is a rock wall. Straight ahead is an indentation in the wall which goes back about 3 feet. On the wall at the rear of the indent is a small hole about the size of a softball. To get near the hole, the caver ducks under an overhang and kneels upon the rocks that rise above the floor by a few inches. By the time the caver reaches this point, they are either warm or sweating, and the first thing they notice is the cool breeze blowing out of the hole. It was my recognition of this hole as a potential doorway to unexplored portions of the cave that ultimately led to this telling of my experience. As has been my tradition for all the years that I've been caving, once the party reaches a point in the cave, usually at its most deepest part, I have everyone turn all of their lights off. Complete blackness fills the eyes. For a moment, the individual caver strains their eye muscles, focusing in and out with the expectation of catching a crumb of light somewhere in the false night. After several futile moments, the caver turns their head at a sound, perhaps another caver, only to have their other senses return and then heighten. The sounds and smells and feelings that have been overlooked to this point come racing to the caver in perfect detail. The pain of their own behind sitting on the cave floor, the smell of the dust and sweat and guano, the sound of modern material shifting on age-old rock as cavers attempt to find some comfort on the solid foundation. At the back of every caver's mind is the question, what if? What if a person had to climb out of a cave with no light? Would they make it? Would they find all of the turns and bends that got them there in the first place? If not, would a rescue party be able to find them once they got lost? The depth of darkness recognized at this time is something that is rarely experienced outside of a cave. Many first-time cavers erroneously declare that they have to hold their hand to within 2 or 3 inches of their face before they can see it, when the reality is the human eye is incapable of seeing in an absence of light. If they didn't hear something coming towards them, they would feel it before they saw it. Complete and total dark. This exercise is a great way to remind people to take backup lighting. As we proceeded to work in the cave, we developed a system pretty early on and little changed in succeeding trips. The first time in the cave, B took first shift at chipping away at the opening. After about a half hour, he needed a break, so I took over. He told me what worked best, and I continued doing the same. We would try new things from time to time to use new muscles, but usually stuck to the same method. We would use the masonry bit and press on the drill as hard as we could and drill out a hole in the rock. Safety glasses and dust masks were worn while we were working. Then we would insert the bullpen and hammer it into the rock and break out smaller chunks of the cave. We would then drill another hole and repeat the process. Occasionally, the drill would hit a soft spot in the rock, and that step would be shortened. We would work until we became too tired to continue, then B and I would trade. While one of us was working, the other would remain in the darkness and either eat or drink or just lay down on the cave floor, padded by rope bags. After just a few rotations, we were tired enough to catch a nap while taking our break. The only light we used was the helmet light on the head of the worker. Since it was pointing towards the hole, the resting person was left mostly in the dark. This was a welcome benefit since the resting person was usually, well, resting. The rest break was also a chance to cool down a bit, which didn't take long in the cooler temperature of the cave. Fortunately, the temperature of the cave allowed us to work pretty hard and not overheat too much. I remember that I frequently looked at the hole and thought, hey, that's big enough, I can definitely squeeze through there, only to be disappointed with my attempt. However, even after the first attempt and failure, I knew that I was going to keep working until I got through that hole. This, despite the fact that I knew it would take many more hours of very hard work, it actually became an obsession with me. I tried to get out to the cave and work on it as often as I could. I hoped that the passage led to a larger, undiscovered cave that we would be the first ones to enter. I guess the explorer in me wanted to find a new frontier there in that cave. Since B is such an avid caver, he was motivated by the same desire to find a new, unexplored cave. What we did find was not at all what I expected.